It's 6:40 a.m., and you're on your knees, wiping flour off a kitchen floor that isn't yours. Flour Naomi Calloway's crew scattered 3 hours ago so her "I baked this myself" video would look unrehearsed. You've done this every week for a year. It's not supposed to mean anything anymore. Then your phone rings. A name you don't recognize yet. Your finger pauses over one last streak of flour before you pick up, and by the time the call ends, everything you thought you knew about rich and poor is going to look different, because whoever this is, they're about to make Naomi look fake. That call is from the second client, someone who pays you far more money and far less attention than Naomi does. You're an estate and lifestyle coordinator, which officially means handling whatever needs doing across two very different households. Unofficially, it means spending your mornings shuttling between two addresses on the same stretch of coastline, 15 minutes apart by car. And it turns out, much further apart than that in every way that actually matters. Watching two completely different versions of rich up close enough some mornings to smell the coffee in both kitchens. One built for a camera, one that never expects to be watched at all. There's a single detail that separates these two people, and it has nothing to do with what either of them owns. Once you see it, you won't look at anyone in this town the same way again. If that flour felt familiar, blend is the word for it. Leave it below. And whether you already think you know who the second client is or not, stay subscribed. The one distinction that really separates them is still coming. When this job was still new, it felt like a small thrill. The kind that comes from mastering a skill no one else on the crew ever bothered to learn. Like knowing exactly how much flour reads as just baked instead of just staged. You'd mix $12 worth of all-purpose flour into a fine dust, sifted across Naomi Calloway's marble island and the tile in front of her oven. Then step back and watch her walk in wearing a linen apron she's never once cooked in. The caption always says some version of the same thing. Just me, baking bread the slow way. No assistant, no team. You used to believe that caption a little, even while you were the assistant standing 4 feet out of frame. The flour has a spec sheet. Not much of one, just a diagram, marked with an X where the light hits best, and a note that says visible on camera, not on counter edges. You follow it the same way you'd follow instructions for hanging a picture straight. Then the second the camera stops, you're back on your knees with a damp cloth. By the time her followers finish watching a woman just wake up and bake, the kitchen looks like nobody's touched it in a week. No one in the comments ever asks who resets the room. You didn't think much of it at first. Staging is staging, and every industry has its version. What changed was smaller than that. On the 4th or 5th shoot, watching Naomi hold a warm loaf up to the light for the photo, you caught yourself checking your watch instead of watching her. Somewhere between shoot 2 and shoot 5, the thing you used to admire. Her calm, her restraint, the whole quiet luxury of it, had quietly turned into something you got paid to manufacture, 1 tablespoon at a time. What that shift actually proves is easy to miss. Naomi's audience believes the no-team version completely. Not because it's convincing, but because no one in that comment section has ever seen what you see. A feed only ever shows the frame that got selected. Nobody's lying to you outright. They're just choosing, very carefully, what you're allowed to see next. That's also around when the second job started. Fewer instructions, no shot lists, no lighting notes, and about 3 times the pay. You didn't ask why yet. You just started splitting your mornings. Here's a number worth holding on to before this gets complicated. Nothing you can see. The kitchen, the apron, the caption tells you anything reliable about what someone actually has. The only thing worth tracking is the ratio between what a person spends, where you can see it, and what they hold where you can't. Naomi's ratio, it turns out, runs almost entirely in one direction. You're about to meet someone whose ratio runs the opposite way. That someone calls mid-morning, between the flour and whatever's next, asking if you can swing by the shipping counter downtown. His truck's in the shop, there's an oversized package he's expecting, and someone has to sign for it in person. His name is Walter Ostrander, retired biomedical engineer, a handful of patents, the kind of client whose instructions arrive in 3 short sentences and never need repeating. At the counter, filling out the pickup form under his name, you glance at the outgoing shipping label sitting in the same stack. An address you don't recognize, care of a pediatric treatment wing. Not a one-time donation, either. A line at the bottom lists a fund bearing his name. One that's been quietly signing checks for that wing for years, long before anyone thought to ask who paid for it, and long before Walter, 6 months into you working for him, has ever once mentioned it himself. You don't say anything. You just sign where you're told to sign and drive the package back to his place. That's where the day catches up with you. Because when you drop his truck keys off that evening, the house is exactly what you'd expect from someone who clips coupons. An aging pickup in the driveway, a field watch on his wrist that probably cost less than your dinner last weekend, the same 3 chipped mugs drying on the same rack you've seen every visit this year. What you read on that label doesn't show up anywhere on him. It isn't supposed to. You spend the drive back running numbers you're not supposed to know. Somewhere around the second red light, curious tips into something you don't quite have a word for. You don't drop anything. You don't gasp. You just find yourself gripping the wheel a little tighter at 10 and 2, the way you do when you're concentrating on a detail nobody else in the car would notice. So here's the question riding home with you. If Naomi's version of modest needs a crew and a shot list to exist, what do you call Walter's? No one who meets Walter walks away suspecting what that shipping label just told you. And that's not an accident. It's just math. The only proof of what he has lives in a filing you'd never think to search. Not on his wrist, not in his driveway, not anywhere a stranger could glance and adjust their opinion of him. Naomi built a version of nothing to see here that a camera could capture. Walter built one a camera never gets near. If you ever want a 1-minute gut check before deciding how much someone's actually worth, here it is. Search their name next to foundation, fund, or hospital board on any public records tool. If something real comes back, that's worth more than every visible signal combined. The truck, the watch, the whole practiced ordinariness of it. What you can see was never the measurement. It was always just the cover. That thought is still sitting with you later that night, in your own apartment, notebook open across your lap. This week's spending log. The one you keep in actual ink, because typing it never makes the numbers feel quite as real. You've just underlined a line near the bottom, and the ink hasn't fully dried when you land on a paragraph in a book you picked up on a whim about tea bowls. Not fine china, rough clay, uneven glaze, sometimes a visible crack repaired with gold lacquer instead of hidden. In 16th century Japan, the warlords who could afford anything were trained, deliberately, to prefer these over gold and silver. A discipline called wabi-cha, practiced under a tea master named Sen no Raikyu in tea rooms built deliberately small, with doorways low enough that even the most powerful guest had to duck to enter and arrive equal to everyone else already kneeling inside. The point wasn't poverty. It was control. Men with the power to own everything were taught to want less on purpose, on a fixed schedule, in a fixed room, until wanting less stopped being a performance and started being reflex. A rehearsed humility that, unlike Naomi's, never needed anyone else in the room to be real. You read that twice. Then, without really deciding to, you close the notebook over your own underlined number. Not dramatically, just a small, automatic motion, the kind you'd use to keep a stranger from reading over your shoulder, except no one else is in the room. Something just rearranged itself in your head. You'd been treating pretending to be poor as one thing with 2 flavors. Naomi's for an audience and Walter's for no one. But this is a third thing, and it's older than either of them. Not a costume, not a hiding place, a muscle. Something you build on purpose, the same way you'd build any other kind of strength, by practicing it on a schedule long before you actually need it. Which raises a question you can't quite put down. Is that what Walter's actually doing? Not concealing money out of habit, but running an active discipline you just happen to witness the edge of. Like catching someone mid-rep at a gym and only seeing one motion, not the years behind it. It's easy to see why almost no financial advice touches this. It's much easier to tell people to hide their money for safety than to tell them to sit with wanting something and not get it. On purpose, repeatedly, until that becomes normal. Concealment is a one-time decision. This is a rep you do again tomorrow, and again the day after that, on days when nobody's grading you and nothing's on camera to prove you did it right. If you want the modern version of a rough clay tea bowl, it's smaller than you'd think. The next time you buy or receive one new thing, hold a hard line. No upgrading anything sitting next to it for at least 30 days. Not the case, not the charger, not the version 2 of whatever it replaced. 30 days of sitting next to something better and choosing not to reach for it. That sounds simple written down. Whether it holds up against a full inbox or a phone that won't stop buzzing with invitations is a different question entirely, and it's one you're about to answer with your own money, not just observe from someone else's driveway. That answer doesn't take long to start collecting evidence. And it doesn't come from Walter. It doesn't come from you yet, either. It comes from two other names already sitting in your calendar for that same week, half a mile and a very different tax bracket apart. First is Sable, who posts a version of the same photo almost every Sunday. A weathered wood table on her ocean-facing porch, one linen cushion slightly askew, a single chipped ceramic mug catching the light. The caption rotates between slow mornings and nothing fancy, just this. What Sable doesn't post is the invoice you sign for on her behalf every Thursday. A same-day rental delivery from a prop company, 2 towns over, itemized right down to weathered oak table, distressed, 1X, and linen cushion, sun-faded, 2X, by Sunday evening. A different truck picks the same pieces back up. Underneath all of it, the porch has a glass patio set that never once makes it into a photo. Then there's Theo Bristow, a marketing consultant 2 streets from Sable, whose whole feed is built around the phrase, slow living, no performance. Theo pays someone, on a separate line item you happen to process for him, to age a brand new leather sofa on his own back porch before every time he opens his home to a small group of followers, scuffing the arms, leaving it in direct sun for a week, dabbing in a few fake water stains with something that smells faintly of vinegar. You didn't ask questions the first time. By the third, you'd started noticing the pattern before he explained it. Neither of them is lying about loving the aesthetic. That's what makes this harder to sort than it should be. You catch yourself doing the same double take twice in 1 week, looking at 2 porches that read, at a glance, like the same kind of person living the same kind of life. It isn't until you're standing in both driveways within 48 hours of each other that the difference actually locates itself. Sable's table only exists because an audience is scheduled to see it. Take away the followers, cancel the delivery, and the porch reverts to glass patio furniture by Monday morning. Nothing about her actual days changes because the table's gone. Theo's sofa, once it's aged, stays aged whether or not he posts that week, whether or not anyone comments, whether or not his numbers are up or down. One of these is built for a viewer. The other just happens to also be visible to one, occasionally, almost as an afterthought. That's the split you'd missed while you were still thinking of modest as a single look. Some of it is costume, worn because someone's watching, and taken off the moment the show ends. Some of it is camouflage, worn regardless, because the person underneath it never stopped wearing it long before there was anyone around to see. From the porch or the driveway, the two are close to indistinguishable. Same materials, same worn-in colors, same careful absence of anything shiny. That's exactly why almost nobody sorts them correctly on site. There's a simple enough test if you ever want to run it yourself. Stop the money behind the scene and see what's left standing. Cancel the prop rental, and Sable's porch is glass furniture again within a week. Fire the man, aging Theo's sofa, and the sofa stays exactly as worn as it already is, because the wear was never rented, it just got sped up once. It would have looked the same in a year either way, help or no help. But knowing how to spot a costume doesn't do much for you if that same question never gets pointed at the one house you never think to run it on, your own. And you had no warning about which part of this week was about to come looking for you next. That part shows up sooner than you think. The following Tuesday, you're the one who has to sit in on a security walkthrough. Naomi's insurance company, after her follower count crossed some threshold, is requiring an updated home assessment, and you're the one who let the contractor in, which means you're the one standing there when he says something he almost certainly says to every client, and you almost certainly aren't supposed to repeat. He tells you half as small talk about a case study his company references in training. Paris, 2016. A woman with several $1 million in jewelry whose location and belongings had been posted, piece by piece, across her own social accounts for months, gets robbed at gunpoint in her hotel room by men who apparently didn't need to guess what she had or where she'd be. You already half remember the story from the news at the time. What you didn't know is that it's taught now, dryly, as a case study. Not a tragedy, a lesson. Don't publish the map to your own house. Then he says the part that actually lands, because it's not about jewelry at all. In his industry, he tells you, quotes go up, not double, but noticeably. The moment a client's home reads as obviously wealthy during the first walkthrough. Nothing dishonest about it, he says. Just a number a contractor lands on, half-consciously, once a house has already told him what the owner can probably afford to pay without blinking. You think about that longer than you mean to, standing in Naomi's driveway with a clipboard that isn't yours. You'd been assuming, this whole week, that the reason someone might want to look poor is mostly about avoiding envy. A soft, social kind of discomfort. This is a different reason entirely, and it's not soft at all. Looking wealthy doesn't just invite feelings. It invites a number, a repair, quote. A stranger's mental estimate of what you'll pay without negotiating. What makes this so easy to miss is that none of it announces itself. No one ever circles back afterward to explain why the number came in a little higher than it did for the last house on the same street. Nobody sends you a bill that says premium applied because your kitchen looked expensive. The extra few $100s just quietly becomes the quote. And the version of you that never gets robbed, because no one ever saw the jewelry. Never finds out how close it came, either. Both costs are invisible by design. One shows up as a crime that didn't happen. The other as a number that looks, on paper, completely ordinary. Which means every visible signal you put into the world, the car in the driveway, the logo on the bag, the renovation someone can see from the street, isn't just decoration, it's a number forming in someone else's head, adjusting upward, whether or not you're in the room to negotiate against it. Before your next big purchase, the question worth asking isn't just, can I afford this? It's, who's going to see this, and what will it quietly cost me the next time someone prices me by eye instead of by what I actually have? You drive away from Naomi's that afternoon doing something you haven't done in a while, running your own driveway, your own bag, your own last renovation, through that same math. It still doesn't add up to the real reason. Not yet. That one's about to walk through your own front door before the week is over. You're still running that same math, half finished, when a text lands from Naomi that evening. Not a work message, a personal one. An invite to a small get-together at her place this weekend. Just a handful of her closest followers. Nothing filmed, she says. Just people. You read it twice, the way you read anything from her that isn't a shot list. And something in your chest does a small, unfamiliar thing. It warms before it calculates. By the next morning, the calculating part has caught up. You've booked a haircut you weren't due for another 6 weeks, because the stylist you'd use for something like this is the one 3 towns over. The one who does the effortless-looking cut that actually costs more than the styled one. You've also started eyeing the canvas tool bag you carry everywhere. The one with the frayed strap you've never minded until you pictured it sitting on Naomi's entryway bench next to everyone else's. By day 2, you're seriously considering getting the inside of your car detailed in case you end up driving anyone home. None of these decisions, on its own, felt like much. Each one arrived dressed as a reasonable, isolated choice. A haircut you were due for anyway, a bag that was getting worn out anyway, a car that could use it anyway. That's exactly how decisions like this are designed to feel. It's only on the third night, adding them up on the same page as this week's spending log, that you see the total sitting there and go quiet for a second. It's more than you'd planned to spend this entire month, for one evening you haven't even attended yet, at a house belonging to someone whose actual bank balance you have never once seen and have no way of confirming. Your own balance, on the other hand, you know exactly. A few $100s, with rent due in 11 days. Here's the part that catches up with you sitting on your own couch, notebook back on your lap. This is the very thing the T-Bowl was supposed to train out of you. Not spending itself, wanting, on command, the moment a door opens, without checking first whether the want is actually yours or just what the room expects you to look like. Walter never has to run this calculation, you realize, because whatever door opens for him, he decided years ago what he was and wasn't willing to want. You're finding out, in real time, that you never made that decision for yourself. You've just never been tested this specifically before. So you're left holding 2 options that both feel uncomfortable in different ways. Keep going, book the last item, walk in polished, spend money you don't have to sit in a room for 2 hours, or stop now, arrive as yourself, and find out whether the invitation was ever actually about you at all. You don't decide that night. What you do instead is smaller. You give yourself 72 hours before spending another dollar tied to that evening, on anything, not a rule you read somewhere. Just the same instinct that made you close a notebook a few nights ago, applied to a calendar instead of a number. 72 hours to find out if the impulse survives without a deadline pushing it. In your head, the flour, Walter's fund, the tea bowls, Sable's rented porch, the contractor's quiet math, and tonight's own haircut all collapse into the same question. Are you looking at someone real, or a version somebody's being paid to make look real? What you don't know yet, sitting there, is that the 72 hours won't matter. Because 2 days from now, Naomi is going to hand you her phone and ask you to answer a message for her. And that message is about to answer a much bigger question than whether you buy a haircut. That message is waiting in her inbox 2 days later, right on schedule. Naomi hands you her phone without looking up from her laptop. Can you just answer this one? I don't have the bandwidth today. In the same casual tone she'd use to ask you to reschedule a delivery. It's long. Longer than most. Written by someone who works nights at a warehouse 2 states over, who says they watched Naomi's video about waking up early and cleaning her own kitchen with no help, no assistant, discipline is free, and took it seriously enough to cut 2 weekly shifts to make room for exactly that kind of morning. Now they're asking, carefully, almost apologetically, whether Naomi has any advice for making rent this month, because the shifts haven't come back yet, and the calm hasn't turned into anything they can pay a landlord with. You read it twice, the way you read the tea bowl passage, except this time nothing in you reaches to close anything. You just sit very still, phone warm in your hand, the cursor blinking in an empty reply box you're supposed to fill in her voice, not yours. Then, because you're the one who processes her invoices too, you already know. You knew before you finished reading the message. The very video this person is talking about. The discipline is free one. Is tied to a brand deal you filed the paperwork for last month. Naomi got paid for that post. Not symbolically. Line item, dollar amount, deposited. You're the one who lit it. You're the one who cleared the counter after. You don't feel the urge to type anything sharp. What you feel is closer to finally seeing the whole week lined up straight, after days of it looking slightly off. Quiet, not loud, the kind of clarity that doesn't need you to raise your voice, post about it, or prove it to anyone standing nearby to be certain of it. Because here, finally, is the actual answer. And it was never the one you started the week expecting. There isn't one reason people who have money choose to look like they don't. There are 2, and they are not the same thing wearing different outfits. Naomi's reason is a performance built for an audience, monetized every time it's convincing. A costume with a paycheck sewn into the lining. Walter's reason, the tea bowl reason, the one you'd started practicing on yourself with a 72-hour rule, is a private discipline that doesn't care if anyone's watching and doesn't come with an invoice. 2 people who look, from a distance, like they're doing the exact same thing. Only one of them is actually free. You know this now because you watched both of them up close, for money, for a week, the flour, the shipping label, the tea bowls, the rental furniture, the insurance walkthrough, your own haircut you almost booked. Every piece of it pointed at the same fork in the road, and you finally see which side of it you're standing on and which side you want to be standing on next year. It matters, this distinction, more than it looks like it should, because one version of modest is something you rent from someone else's attention, gone the moment the deal ends, and the other is something you own outright, whether or not a single person ever notices. Somebody has to decide which one they're building. It might as well be you. Before you type a single word back to a stranger, asking a woman who gets paid to look humble for real advice on rent, you do one thing first. You check, quietly, whether the story someone tells you about just discipline ever comes with a number attached to it that they didn't mention. If it does, that number is the real advice. Everything else is the caption. Which is what you're thinking about the next morning. Back on your knees on a different kitchen floor. Flour dust settling into the grout the way it has every week for a year. Except this time your hand slows down mid-wipe on its own. Not because anyone told you to notice anything, but because you finally know exactly what you're looking at. That flour never proved Naomi was rich, and it never proved she was poor. It only ever proved that someone, somewhere, was being paid to make her look like neither. And across town, in a driveway with an aging pickup in it, a man in a watch that cost less than your last dinner out is quietly proving the exact opposite. for free, to no one, the way he has for years before you ever showed up to notice. Real financial freedom, it turns out, was never going to arrive as one clean moment. The day you finally hide enough, or earn enough, or buy the right kind of nothing that finally makes you feel finished. It's smaller than that, and slower, and far less photogenic than either Naomi's kitchen or Walter's driveway ever let on. It's a limit you set on wanting, on an ordinary Tuesday, for no audience and no caption, repeated often enough that it eventually stops feeling like a decision and starts feeling like just who you are. You don't quit the flower job. You don't confront Naomi, or lecture the person messaging her, or post anything about any of it. You just start doing, quietly, the one small thing that never shows up on anyone's feed. Closing your own notebook a little slower, letting a purchase sit for 3 days before it happens, choosing the version of modest that doesn't need anyone watching to hold it up. Nobody photographs that. Nobody has to. If any part of this week felt closer to yours than you expected, the flower, the 72 hours, the haircut you almost booked, blend is worth leaving below, an honest answer to whether you've caught yourself doing the same thing. If you want the rest of the ratio, the parts that never made anyone's caption, staying subscribed is the way to keep watching for it. Before you close this tab, find one thing you bought only because something next to it started looking dated. That's the whole test. No T-bowl required, just an honest look.